The Laughing Council. The council chamber was alive with color and sound. Holoscreens glowed across the wide hall, showing star maps, fleet movements, and flashing signals from a distant border system. The gathered representatives of the great empires leaned back in their chairs, their voices loud, their laughter rolling like thunder. On the main screen, a small group of ships flickered into view. They were not sleek like the vessels of the Vaikari, or massive like the cruisers of the Dar, Tishal. No, these ships looked old, scarred, and smaller than the fleets that surrounded them. They appeared like insects wandering into the hunting grounds of giants. "Look at them," one reptilian delegate hissed, his teeth flashing as he laughed. "Are those even warships? They look like scraps tied together." The others joined in. The insectoid ambassador clattered her thin limbs together in amusement. "I have seen smugglers with better craft. Who dares to send such a tiny fleet into contested space?" The chamber shook with laughter, voices echoing off the highway walls. They mocked the fleet, dismissing it as the plaything of some forgotten race. To them, it was nothing more than an annoyance, a curious distraction before the real war began. But one voice did not laugh. At the far end of the chamber, an old, gray-skinned counselor leaned forward, his long fingers pressed against the glowing table. His eyes were fixed on the markings along the ship's hulls. They were faint but clear. His chest tightened as memory clawed at him. "Quiet," he said softly. The others ignored him. "I said quiet." The laughter slowed, confusion rising. The delegates turned toward him, their amusement fading into irritation. "What is it, Elder Vaith?" one asked impatiently. The old counselor's voice trembled. "Do you not see? The insignia, the shape of those ships. Do you not know who they belong to?" The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. Delegates leaned closer to the screens. There, on the battered hulls, was a simple symbol, a blue and white sphere with faint lines across it. The insectoid ambassador tilted her head. An old design, perhaps a dead colony. Elder Vaith's hands tightened into fists. "No, not dead, not forgotten. That is the mark of humans." The chamber rippled with whispers. Some shook their heads. Others laughed, again though with less confidence. "Humans?" the reptilian delegate hissed. "A minor species. Weak bodies. No claws. No fangs. Their worlds were small and unimportant. Surely they were destroyed long ago." But Elder Vaith's eyes remained cold. "You fools. You do not remember. You are too young. I was there when the archives told of them. I was there when the story spread. They are not weak. They are not to be mocked." The laughter faltered, leaving behind a heavy silence. The fleet on the screen moved slowly, almost carelessly, drifting into the heart of the contested zone. Their numbers were small, their weapons outdated compared to the shining ships of the other empires. And yet, there was something unsettling in the way they moved. Not random, not lost. Every formation was sharp, precise, like blades waiting to cut. "They cannot win," the insectoid delegate insisted, though her voice now carried a thin note of fear. "Look at their numbers. Barely a dozen ships, our fleet's number in the hundreds." "Yes," Elder Vaith said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. "And yet they came anyway." The words hung heavy in the air. Delegates shifted uncomfortably. Some tapped claws or fingers against the table. Others looked away from the screens as if the sight of the small fleet burned their eyes. At last, a booming laugh broke the tension. The Tishal warlord rose to his feet, towering over the others. His thick voice echoed across the chamber. "Enough of this nonsense. They are insects pretending to be predators. We will crush them and scatter their remains across the void. Humanity is nothing but a ghost." But as he spoke, the chamber's lights dimmed. A sharp crackle of sound came from the speakers. The counselors froze. Across the holoscreens, the tiny fleet shifted formation. Their engines flared, their movements sudden and exact. It was not the slow shuffle of prey. It was the silent dance of predators closing in. Then, a voice cut through the chamber. Calm, steady, Human. Transmission incoming, the chamber's system announced. Static filled the air for a moment. Then a message echoed clear. This is the human expeditionary fleet. You have entered restricted space. We will engage. The words fell like a hammer. The delegates froze. No one laughed now. Elder Vaith closed his eyes, his heart heavy. He had prayed he would never hear that voice again, not in his lifetime. He whispered to himself, almost too softly for the others to hear. And so it begins. The holoscreens flared brighter as the first human ship surged forward, and the council chamber went silent. Whispers of old wars, the council chamber was silent now. The laughter that had filled the air minutes ago was gone, leaving behind a cold emptiness. The words of the transmission still echoed in their minds. We will engage. The holoscreens, the human fleet moved with a strange grace. The ships were old and scarred, their metal darkened by battles fought long ago. Yet they moved together like wolves circling prey. Every turn, every shift of their engines carried purpose. The delegates leaned closer, their faces pale, their voices lowered to whispers. This cannot be real, one murmured. A myth, another said quickly, as if trying to convince herself. No species so small could survive against the empires. But Elder Vaith shook his head slowly. His old eyes did not leave the screen. You have not lived long enough to remember. You have not seen what they are capable of. I have. The insectoid ambassador clicked her jaws nervously. Stories, Elder, nothing more. Old war tales told to frighten hatchlings. Humans are fragile. Their worlds were easy to conquer. Elder Vaith's voice hardened. Fragile? You call them fragile? Then why do the archives say entire fleets burned when they were provoked? Why do the records hide their campaigns behind sealed files? I tell you this, humanity does not fight to win territory. They fight to survive. And survival makes them unstoppable. A hush fell over the chamber. The younger delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Some had never even heard of humans until today. To them, humanity was just a forgotten name in the dust of history. Yet the old counselor's words carried weight. They were a young race once, he continued. No claws, no armored skin, no great size. The galaxy mocked them, just as you mock them now. But when war came to their worlds, they fought with fury no one expected. They fought with fire. They turned their weakness into strength. The reptilian delegate scoffed, though his voice lacked confidence. Even if they once fought well, that was long ago. These ships are relics. Rusting relics cannot face the power of our fleets. The holoscreen shimmered again. The human fleet shifted into a wedge formation, sharp and perfect. They moved faster than their size suggested. Each ship seemed to anticipate the other's path, as if guided by a single mind. And the council felt it, that unsettling sense of purpose. The insectoid ambassador whispered, why would they come here? Why now? Do they not see they are outnumbered 100-1? Elder Vaith closed his eyes for a moment. That is what makes them dangerous. They see. And they come anyway. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the holoscreens and the quiet thrum of the chamber's systems. Then from the shadows another counselor spoke, a quiet, slender being with pale skin. His voice was low but steady. My great-grandmother told me stories, he said. She was a soldier when her world fell to humans. They had nothing, no advanced weapons, no vast armies. But they fought street by street, house by house. She said they never surrendered. Even when defeat was certain, they made the victors bleed. The others turned to him, unease growing deeper. The pale counselor's eyes were distant, lost in memory. She said one human soldier captured a fortress alone. Alone. Not because he was stronger. Not because he was larger. But because he refused to stop. She said the humans fought as though every drop of blood was worth the galaxy itself. A chill spread across the chamber. The reptilian delegate shifted uncomfortably. Enough of these tales. They are old legends, twisted with time. We have fleets of thousands. We will crush them with ease. But his words sounded hollow. Because, as he spoke, the hollow screens showed something strange. The human ships were scanning enemy positions, and not blindly but carefully, like hunters marking prey. They adjusted their paths in silence, forming patterns that the younger delegates could not understand. Only Elder Vaith knew. He had seen it before, long ago. He whispered softly, "They are planning." "Planning what?" the insectoid ambassador asked. The old counselor turned his gaze toward her, his voice heavy with dread. "Their first strike." The chamber grew colder. No one laughed now. No one mocked. The air itself felt heavy, as if the weight of history had returned to remind them of forgotten truths. For the first time, the council began to wonder. What if the old stories were not myths? What if the fragile species they had ignored was still as relentless as the legends claimed? On the hollow screens, the human fleet glowed brighter, engines burning like sparks in the dark. They moved closer, silent and precise. And across the chamber, a single thought passed through every mind. The galaxy had laughed at the tiny fleet, but perhaps they should not have. The first strike. The council chamber pulsed with a heavy silence. Dozens of eyes stayed fixed on the hollow screens, where the human fleet glided through space with eerie calm. The ships were still few in number, their hulls scarred, their weapons hidden under layers of old metal. But there was something in their movement that unsettled every veteran in the room. The insectoid ambassador's limbs clicked nervously. "They move too close," she whispered. "No fleet this small should dare approach so directly." The Tashal warlord growled in amusement, though unease flickered behind his eyes. "Let them come. When our cannons fire, nothing will remain of them. One volley, and they will scatter like dust." Elder Vaith did not answer. He leaned forward, his gaze locked on the screen, his old heart pounding. He remembered the ancient records. He remembered stories his people had tried to erase. He knew what was about to come. Across the stars, the first enemy fleet shifted into attack position. Hundreds of ships turned their weapons toward the small wedge of human vessels. On the hollow screens, glowing symbols marked their cannons charging, energy building like the beating heart of a storm. The chamber filled with tension. Everyone expected the tiny fleet to retreat, to scatter, to run, but the humans did not move. They held their formation, steady and silent. Their engines flared brighter, but they did not fire. They waited. "Why do they not shoot?" the reptilian delegate hissed. "Why do they not even turn?" Elder Vaith's answer came like a whisper of death. "Because they want you to fire first." And then the galaxy shook. The alien fleet unleashed its barrage. Hundreds of beams, missiles, and plasma bolts tore across the darkness, lighting space with blinding fury. The human fleet vanished under a storm of fire. For a moment, the council chamber erupted in cheers, the delegates roaring in triumph. But the cheers died quickly. The light faded. The smoke cleared. The human ships were still there. Not all, but most. Shields shimmered with strange layered patterns. Some ships had taken heavy damage, but they did not drift or retreat. They surged forward, engines blazing like burning stars. They survived, the insectoid ambassador gasped. How? No one could answer. The wedge of human ships cut through the storm like a blade. Then, as one, they opened fire. It was not wild, desperate fire. It was precise. Every missile, every beam, every torpedo struck a weak point. A fuel core, a command bridge, a shield generator. Alien ships exploded in sudden bursts, fire tearing across the fleet. The council chamber fell silent again, the only sound the steady hum of the hollow screens. The reptilian delegates' scales trembled. Impossible. No fleet this small can know our weaknesses. They cannot. They can, Elder Vaith said grimly. They learn, they study, they strike where it hurts most. On the screens, human ships twisted and turned, moving in ways No one expected. Their patterns were unpredictable, yet perfectly coordinated. One moment they scattered, the next they closed in like wolves. Enemy ships fired blindly, unable to keep up. The Tishal warlord slammed his fist on the table. They fight like animals. Elder Vaith shook his head. No. They fight like humans. The holoscreens lit up again as a massive alien battleship tried to crush the human wedge. Its cannons blazed, its armor thicker than mountains. But before it could deliver its full volley, 3 human destroyers cut across its path. They moved so close they should have been destroyed. But instead they fired point blank. Their combined strike ripped through the battleship's core. The giant ship exploded, fire blooming across the void. The council chamber shook with the force of the blast. Gasps filled the air. The pale counselor, the one who had spoken of his great-grandmother, whispered, "They do not care if they survive the strike. They only care that the strike succeeds." Another alien delegate muttered in horror, "They fight as though every ship carries the spirit of a soldier." On the screens, the human fleet pressed forward. They did not slow. They did not scatter. They attacked again and again, each blow crippling ships many times their size. The insectoid ambassador clutched the table with trembling limbs. "This is madness. No species fights like this, not for numbers so small." Elder Vaith's voice was steady, though his hands shook. "That is because you do not understand. To humans, war is not about numbers. It is about will." The council chamber grew darker as the battle raged. The great fleets of the empires, proud and vast, were torn apart by a force they had laughed at minutes before. Explosions painted the stars, and the tiny fleet cut deeper into enemy lines, leaving ruin in its path. The reptilian delegate sank into his chair, his voice breaking. "If this is their first strike, what will their second look like?" No one answered, because deep inside, every delegate in that chamber already knew. The humans had only just begun. Humanity's secret weapon, the chamber was silent, except for the hum of the holoscreens and the distant sound of ships dying in fire. Alien fleets, once proud and untouchable, now struggled against the tiny wedge of human vessels that cut through them like blades of light. No one in the council chamber dared laugh now. "They fight like demons," the insectoid ambassador whispered. Her limbs clattered nervously, echoing against the cold walls. "Every strike is a kill. Every movement has purpose. This is not war. This is slaughter." The Tishal warlord leaned forward, his massive frame trembling with rage and fear. "How? How do they fight like this? They are outnumbered 100-1. This is impossible." Elder Vaith's eyes were dark. His voice, low and steady, carried across the chamber. "It is not impossible. It is human." The delegates turned to him, waiting, desperate for an answer. "You do not understand," the old counselor continued. "You see only numbers, weapons, and ships. Humans see something more. Their fleets are not just machines, they are memories, they are families. They are history carried through the stars." The hollow screens shifted, zooming in on one of the battered human cruisers. Its hull was scarred with old marks, symbols painted by hand. At first the delegates thought it was decoration. Then the pale counselor leaned closer. His voice shook. "Those are names." The camera focused. Thousands of names were carved into the metal, etched deep into the hull. Names of the dead. Names of ancestors. Names carried from one generation to the next. The reptilian delegate hissed in disbelief. "They carved their dead into their ships?" Elder Vaith nodded. "Their ships are not mere machines. They are homes. They are graves. They are legacies. Every strike you see now is powered by centuries of memory. Do you wonder why they do not retreat? It is because to retreat would mean abandoning the voices of their own blood." The council chamber trembled as another alien battleship exploded on the screens, torn apart by human fire. The insectoid ambassador whispered in horror, "It is as if the ships themselves want revenge," and in a way, it was true. The humans had bound their war vessels with more than steel and fire. They had built them with stories. with AI that carried the instincts of warriors long gone, with traditions passed down from captain to captain, family to family. These were not ordinary fleets. These were floating fortresses of memory, sharpened by centuries of pain and survival. The holoscreens shifted again. One human destroyer, broken and burning, charged straight into the path of a massive alien carrier. The counselors gasped. "It will be destroyed," one shouted. But the destroyer did not stop. Even as enemy fire tore into it, the ship held its course. Its engines flared brighter, brighter still, until it rammed directly into the carrier's weak point. The explosion ripped through both ships, a star blooming in the darkness. The chamber shook with the force of it. The pale counselor whispered, "They sacrifice without hesitation. They die if it means taking the enemy with them." Elder Vaith's voice was grim. "They do not measure victory by survival. They measure it by ensuring the enemy fears them." One by one, the alien fleets began to falter. Commanders panicked. Formations collapsed. Ships scattered. Against overwhelming numbers, the humans pressed forward, relentless and merciless. The insectoid ambassador clutched the table. This is why their name was whispered as legend. This is why they vanished for centuries. They were not defeated. They were waiting. Her words cut through the chamber like a blade. For centuries, the galaxy had told itself that humanity was gone, erased by time, too fragile to endure. But now, watching the tiny fleet tear apart empires, the truth was clear. Humans had never vanished. They had been building, preparing, teaching their children to fight as their ancestors had fought, not for conquest, but for survival. The reptilian delegates' scales darkened with fear. If this is only one fleet, how many more are hidden? How many more carry these names? No one answered. On the holoscreens, the human flagship came into view. Larger than the others, scarred with centuries of battle, it carried the same carved names on its hull. But above all those names, one stood out, painted bright and bold across its prow. Earth. The chamber froze. The word itself was like a ghost, a world once thought lost, a world whose people had been mocked, underestimated, forgotten. But Earth had not forgotten the galaxy. A new transmission filled the chamber. The voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of iron. "We are the fleet of Earth. You brought war to our borders. Now you will understand why your ancestors feared us." The delegates trembled. Some lowered their heads. Others whispered prayers. The warlord of the Tushal, who had once laughed the loudest, now sat silent, his claws digging deep into the table. And Elder Vaith closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "The secret is not their weapons, it is not their ships. The secret is that humans never forget, and they never forgive." The holoscreens erupted again as the human flagship fired its main cannon. A beam of light, bright as a star, cut through the darkness and tore a path through the alien fleet. Entire squadrons vanished in fire. And still, the tiny fleet pressed on. The silent aftermath. The council chamber was no longer filled with voices, no arguments, no laughter, not even whispers, only silence. The only sound that remained was the deep hum of the holoscreens and the distant thunder of destruction echoing across space. On the glowing maps, the battlefield stretched wide. Where once a proud armada of hundreds of alien warships had stood, now only wreckage drifted. Flames burned in the void, broken hulls spun slowly, and the cries of defeated commanders crackled faintly before vanishing into static. And yet the humans still stood. The tiny fleet, battered and scarred, had survived. Some ships burned. Others limped forward with damaged engines, but they did not stop. Their formation remained sharp, unbroken, like a blade still hungry for battle. The insectoid ambassador's limbs trembled against the table. "This cannot be real," she whispered. "It is impossible. We had numbers, we had strength, they had nothing." Elder Vaith finally looked up from the screens, his face heavy with sorrow. They had everything that mattered: will, memory, purpose. That is more powerful than numbers. The pale counselor who had spoken of his great-grandmother now sat in silence, his eyes wide with something that was not only fear, but respect. He whispered, "We mocked them. We laughed at them. And now..." His voice broke. "Now, they remind us why even legends carried their name with fear." The chamber lights flickered as a transmission signal came through. The council members froze, their throats tight, their hearts heavy. It was the humans. The voice that filled the chamber was calm, steady, and colder than the void itself. "This is the fleet of Earth. You brought your empires into our borders. You mocked our numbers. You thought us weak. Today, you see the truth. We do not seek war, but when war comes, we end it." The words carried like iron across the room, pressing into every chest. Remember this day. Remember what you saw. Humanity asks for nothing from you except silence. Stay out of our space, or next time there will be no council left to laugh. The transmission cut, leaving only static behind. The counselors sat frozen. No one dared to speak. The insectoid ambassador finally lowered her head, her limbs trembling. "What have we done?" The Tishal warlord, who had once boasted loudly of human weakness, now sat hunched in silence. His claws had torn deep grooves into the table, but his eyes no longer burned with pride. They were filled with fear. Elder Vaith's voice was heavy as stone. "You mocked a storm and thought it was a breeze. You forgot the warnings carved into history, and now you see. Humans are not weak. They are not gone. They are eternal." The holoscreens showed the human fleet turning slowly away from the battlefield. They did not pursue the fleeing survivors. They did not send more transmissions. They simply drifted back into the darkness of space, their scarred hulls glowing faintly with the names of the dead. The pale counselor whispered, "They leave, but they leave us with silence." And silence it was. For long minutes no one spoke. The chamber that had once been filled with laughter and arrogance now echoed with nothing. No sound, but the slow thrum of the council systems. No voices, but the whispers of fear that no delegate dared to say aloud. Because every one of them knew the truth. The humans had not come to conquer. They had not come to occupy. They had come only to deliver a message, and that message had been written not in words but in fire. Across the stars, wreckage floated, a graveyard of fleets that had once believed themselves invincible. And in the minds of every council member, one thought remained: if this was only one fleet, how many more wait in the shadows of Earth? Elder Vaith rose slowly, his old frame shaking. He looked across the silent chamber, his voice steady and final. "Mark this day in your records," he said. "Mark it well. This was the day humanity returned, and the day the galaxy remembered why it once feared their name." He turned back to the holoscreen one last time, watching the tiny fleet vanish into the distance, leaving only silence behind. His voice dropped to a whisper, "And this time, the galaxy will not forget." The lights dimmed. The council chamber remained still, heavy with the weight of its mistake. There would be no more laughter, only silence.